I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. Welcome everyone to the Planning Commission meeting for the Village of Morton. Today is Monday, April 23rd. First order of duty this evening is roll call.
Zobrist.
Here.
Farrell.
Here.
Keach. Here. Knapp.
Here.
Fick. Ritterbush.
Here.
Smock.
Here.
Westlake.
Here.
DeWeese.
Here.
Quorum.
Excellent. Next order this evening is the approval of minutes. Included in your packet from our last meeting, which was March 26th, is the meeting minutes. Having reviewed that, does anyone have any changes, omissions, or alterations to submit? Hearing none, do we have a motion to approve the minutes from March 26, 2018?
So moved.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
There it is. Call when ready.
Voice roll. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same.
Great, thank you. Next up is the public hearing. Before we get into the public hearing, our council will provide a brief discussion of how this goes.
Thank you. A public hearing is being held tonight pursuant to published notice. Any person wishing to make a comment to the Planning Commission will be afforded an opportunity to do so and will give their testimony under oath or affirmation. At the conclusion of the public hearing, the Planning Commission will make recommendation to the Village Board. The Planning Commission makes recommendations only. The Village Board is responsible for taking final action on these matters.
Great, thank you very much. First ordinance this evening is the amendments regarding setback variances. This is to Chapter 10 of Title 10 of the Municipal Code. As we discussed at our last meeting, there was some discussion about this, and specifically with regard to where this would take place. Roger, do you want to just give a brief narrative on how this was altered?
Basically, after Mr. DeWeese pointed out what would we do in the downtown area, which was an excellent point, I met with Attorney McGrath, and we've got several maps, but we landed on this was the more recent map, defined that district, which pretty well takes in the downtown area and the business area. Is if it's in that vicinity, then you can still ask for a variance, and if you're outside of that, you would not be eligible to ask for a variance. Pat, if you want to chime in with anything, feel free. So,
I think when we went back to the drawing board, we wanted to address that circumstance of downtown district, so we felt this map was a little bit broader than the other map we considered, so that was...
yeah, we did look at that where there's the map. It's actually in your book. It's green.
Yep.
And it refers to the old Morton district in terms of parking.
Correct.
But we thought this, like Pat said, was a little better fit, and
It incorporates all the areas that would be more, yeah.
yeah.
So then, the idea, of course, it just in review was that in areas where we're trying to promote higher density, more urban environment, or where we're just trying to work around existing buildings with potential redevelopment, that these setbacks would still be allowed a potential variance through the typical process, whereas in other areas within the community that process would go away. Any thoughts or questions from the table tonight? Any from the public? If there are no concerns, do we have a motion to approve ordinance making amendments regarding the setback variance?
I move that we accept this ordinance making amendments regarding setback variances to Chapter 10 of Title 10 of the Morton Municipal Code.
Thank you, Commissioner Keach. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you very much. You call when ready.
Keach.
Yes.
Knapp.
Yes.
Ritterbush.
Yes.
Smock.
Yes.
Westlake.
Yes.
DeWeese.
Yes.
Zobrist.
Yes.
Farrell.
Yes.
Approved.
Thank you very much. Next item this evening for public hearing is something near and dear to our heart. It's an ordinance regarding murals, allowing murals for the downtown area. This has come through us a couple of times. We've had some time to research. The idea last time was that I would do some additional digging on some communities who have successfully adopted such programs. I know a couple other commission members have done their own research as well. And I think there's several conclusions that were arrived at. As we get into this, I'll just briefly give a very quick overview of what I found with two communities who I had the pleasure of speaking with some of their economic people. So Tucson, Arizona, which we had discussed previously, we knew had a relatively new but thriving mural. Secondly, it was Philadelphia, which I find through my conversation, Philadelphia was really the pilot program that a lot of these other communities have borrowed from, because it's had it the longest, it's worked out most of its growing pains, and it has a very substantial network of murals throughout its community. What was interesting is, I believe our table was sort of moving in on trying to move this into public bodies only, because at that time, the concern over content control is somewhat mitigated. City of Tucson has two programs. One program is for the municipal buildings, and it is handled a little bit separately. The other program is a private program, and it's distinctly different than what we have going here, because that program is funded, overseen, and governed by the Tohono O'odham Nation, which is an Indian nation there. And they actually are the ones that submit what's called an RFP. Not unlike construction or architecture, there's a request for proposal that goes out. Information in that RFP will be about the locations that are being submitted. It's a request for artists to submit ideas, and there are some just touchstones that they ask for in those submissions. Make it make sense for the community. Tell us why it makes sense for the community. What is it about this message that you think needs to be told, and what is its impact overall? And those selections and those RFPs all get submitted to a committee. That committee reviews them, selects their favorites, and then it goes up for public. In one process, in Philadelphia, it goes up for public vote. In Tucson, they have a secondary process after it goes through a small selection committee. The building owner gets to finally select which one they want on there out of the generally 3 finalists that make it to that round. None of the employees that I discussed this with were aware of how they got around the concerns of, is this censorship in some way, shape, or form? They said that the way these things are worded is they are responses to a request for proposal. And because of that, they are able to select what they want. Philadelphia uses both public and private buildings. Tucson started with public buildings and has moved into private buildings as well. And some form of this process is used for both. So that is a very, very fast kind of just narration of what goes on with these two programs. And the gentleman from the Tucson EDC was very forthcoming in that they have been very lucky. They have not had any challenges that he's aware of in this process, but that the selection committee was, they look for art. And sometimes what the selection committee decides are finalists might have some messages inside there, but they feel like they're done appropriately to create discourse. And then or discussion, I should say. And then as they go out, then the building owner makes the final decision. And oftentimes on the private buildings, he said that makes the final determining factor, because most business owners want a positive piece of art on their building, and they're making a selection that they think hits that note. So where that leaves us, I think when we left this last, we circled back and forth on how do we make something that, an ordinance that allows us to introduce this into our community without creating a whole lot of new oversight that needs to be governed. And then of course the concern over how you govern it, because it is art. I think Commissioner Smock noted initially, what about public buildings? And I have also asked the question, and I don't know, Counselor, if you're ready to answer this yet, but what if we did decide that private buildings could have wall space rented, and then it's a 3-year term? In most of these mural programs, by the way, it is a 3 or 5 year submission, so it's going to be there for that amount of time, and whoever the committee is that selects it, they also have the financing to make sure that the mural stays intact throughout that process. So, you know, there's logistics that would need to be decided on this, depending on how we do it, but, questions?
Justin, do you think that this ordinance that we're reading tonight answers those questions and looks like those successful programs that you mentioned?
I don't know that it matches up with everything that this table has presented as concerns and or considerations. I think it's, the challenge we're going to keep running into, I think, is we're either going to have a program and we're going to have to decide how far can we go with regard to editorial, you know, making sure that the positives are of what we're trying to do are all that are captured here. I don't know that we're going to be able to do that in any way, shape, or form. I mean, Pat, is a public domain available for rent by a government? And if so, does that even provide you still that same power?
So the ordinance is prepared would limit the permissibility of murals to public bodies.
Right.
It would be public art only. And I would certainly have no reservations on the village's behalf if there were to be a lease or a license agreement entered into between a private property owner and a public body where the private property owner grants the public body use of
For a certain period of
a
time.
wall or a facade.
And you don't feel, though, that that would then sort of inject a concern, because, I mean, you're not opening the village up to the liability you're trying to avoid by doing that.
I believe that would still be public art, and then that gives us greater institutional control over that. And I think also, based on the sensibilities of the public bodies you're limiting it to. I can't imagine any of our public bodies are going to place art that would be deemed offensive or against the commission sensibilities on a building within town. So I think in two regards it becomes somewhat self-policing.
How do you envision public body, how do you envision that selection process? Who would be involved in that? Or is that something that would be specified further by, and now that the ordinance is created, we draft, or an agreement is drafted on how this process goes about? Because it still would require private funding.
I think it's the funding is I think entirely up to the public body. I think it'd be a permissible source of public funds depending on the public body who's installing the
Petitioning,
mural.
yeah.
I, at least in preparing this initial draft, and certainly it's up to the commission's recommendations and what you want to see, but in tailoring the ordinance and limiting it to public bodies, and in the interest of limiting the amount of new regulatory framework we have to put in place, I didn't initially contemplate a village-appointed
Right.
review process or any greater degree of content control than was originally proposed in the ordinance. Again, on the idea that the public bodies are essentially, I would expect to be self-policing.
Well,
But
to
if-
that, I'm sorry, to that point, does that, like, as I was reading it, kind of made me wonder if some of the language then is moot. Because the fact that you actually could screen it based on content. I mean, you could have criteria that was content-based if it's the public body. You wouldn't have to worry about obscenity. And there's some of the language in there, First Amendment, that may be moot if it's public body only. Is that correct?
You certainly have enhanced discretion to regulate content and,
Yeah.
and obtain additional information in the review process regarding proposed content. And yes.
I think with regard to what we've been sort of laboring over at this table these past few months, I think this draft gets us much closer to at least making a recommendation that can potentially introduce this, get a couple of these projects potentially started, and then we can decide if there's enhancement or if there's additions or changes or things that we need to do. I mean, this is clearly the training wheels version, right? This is the safest version of this potential ordinance that I think could be drafted. And I do believe that a lot of the concerns are addressed here. Now, there'll probably be other ones that come up, but it's a start. Is there, by the way, anyone from the public that wants to talk about any of this? Any questions?
your hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. Good evening, everyone. Leanne Brown with the Morton Chamber of Commerce and Economic Development Council. And just a couple comments from our last discussion. I don't see anything alarming in this ordinance. My thought is our request currently is from private buildings. So if we are interested in understanding what that type of element of potential murals could look like, this ordinance doesn't allow for that to happen. We have uncovered and haven't had really enough time of some other really good programs and process out there. We recently attended the Art Pop announcement over in Peoria. The founder of the Art Pop organization was there. Art Pop is in 14 states. We did not have a chance to have a detailed conversation with her. I think she would be somebody to reconnect with and understand that process. We discovered a program in Greater Memphis that there is, as Justin alluded to, I think there's success out there in selecting a project, a location, determining maybe some potential funding sources, and then having a RFP type process that people can submit to a committee or a commission and actually go through a selection process. I think there's some really good established programs out there, successful communities that are doing this that we can learn from. And so I would maybe encourage, not that I want to hold this up by any means, but maybe it's okay to pause a little bit longer and take a look at those programs and that process to see if out of the gate, if we need to make any tweaks to this ordinance. So you are comfortable in there being a process. There's a selection, there's a jury, there's only so many that happen every year. A lot of these programs, it's a 1-year placement for the art, and then move forward from there would be one of my suggestions. Just because that's the request that we're receiving from public interest is private property. There's going to be cost to this if you want to do this right. So the public buildings, our taxing bodies, are going to have to come up with a way to pay for this. Is that something that, where we want our tax dollars, or where those funds could come from for our public buildings? Not that I think that's a great avenue, and hopefully one that we can keep in there as an option. But I think there's more that we can explore to other programs and communities that are out there. I don't know if I have a copy for everyone, but I can email the link back out. But here is a copy of the Greater Memphis program that I will share.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question about one of the assumptions that she just made, that it says the public body shall be permitted to install. Can that be done on private property?
Yes.
Okay,
So
so that
would it-
wouldn't preclude us from publicly putting murals on private buildings.
There would have to be a license agreement, at least some legal
Okay.
backbone to say, I, the property owner, am granting you public body use of this space for a period of time. But the ordinance doesn't restrict it to publicly owned parcels or physical public buildings.
Do you think an RFP process really keeps a person from saying, well, I want to do my own mural on my own private building, and even though you've got an RFP process, I think that's unconstitutional, I'm just going to do my own thing?
While I haven't had the opportunity to look in depth at either the process Justin mentioned in Tucson or the ones Leanne mentioned, and due respect given, they don't strike me as processes that would seem to me, at least based on my initial understanding of them, to pass constitutional muster. And the risk you run is, as you stated, that someone makes a contest to your process by disregarding it and installing a mural. So I think that potentially is a risk presented, though I haven't, again, had the opportunity to get into the weeds on
Sure.
on how a program like this might work.
If a private building owner wanted a mural on their building, they could donate to the public body in this interest, and in a way, finance it, even though it's the public body that's installing it. Is that correct?
Yeah, I wouldn't see any reason why a public body, based on the way the ordinance is currently constituted, couldn't reach an agreement with the property owner, where the property owner, donates money to cover the cost of the installation, licenses the use of the space or leases the space, and the public body has the art installed. So,
Okay.
yeah, the answer to your question is yes. I don't initially see any concerns with that.
What concerns do you have with that, Leanne? So, for example, somebody who owns a building, they've got a nice wall that would lend itself well to, under this ordinance, lends itself well to a mural. There could be a process in place where, in effect, they hire the village to install the mural. And they have, and the owner can participate in the process of what actually goes on the mural, but there's an RFP process that the city actually administers. Am I saying the right thing, Pat? I mean,
I think so.
Yeah,
and then but the owner of the building is also included in that RFP process, and they make a selection and they pay the city a fee for the mural, which covers the cost of the administration of this process and the cost of the art. And the village writes the check.
the one limiting factor, and this may or may not have bearing on how Leanne might answer your question, but if the mural would have to bear some, for a public body to be authorized even under an agreement like that, in my opinion, to expend funds to put up the mural, there would have to be some public artistic benefit to it. So, and our ordinance is relatively tailored to not allow for signs, for example, but
Right.
if you wanted to put, pictures of candy on the side of your candy store, you would probably have a hard time getting a public body to feel that's an artistic
But they-
installation of public good to
But there
justify
would be
a
no
conditional
public
residence.
funds actually spent on it. It would be.
Well, the money would go through the public body, and once those funds are given to the public body, any expenditure, any check the village writes, it has to ultimately be supported fundamentally with an authorization. The public body has to spend those funds.
That's their catch-22. It's also how, I'm guessing here, I'm playing attorney, but that's also probably how this looks real as opposed to just a way of faking
Correct.
it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I think also, like I said earlier, you can switch and make it content-based. Since it's the public body that's in control of it, you can have content-based criteria, like something that's about Morton or about our community. And you could add whatever adjectives you wanted into that to make it kind of culturally significant or things along those lines. You could actually completely switch gears with the way this policy's written, which is to protect against something, and you could more define it as to what you'd like it to be. I mean, you can take out the provisions about the First Amendment and content-neutral basis and concerns about obscenity, and all those things kind of become moot, and you could actually set up criteria that you want to see, which would keep someone from just putting candy on the side of their candy store or something like that.
At the risk of
No, I'm going to agree with you already.
getting tomatoes thrown at me, I wouldn't object to kicking the can down the road one more month, just to listen to Leanne's.
Yeah, when is my term up?
It's not next month.
Leanne, I would say that this is good information, and as I just kind of scan this quickly, I'm seeing a lot of very similar, processes here to the ones that I saw both in Tucson and with the Philadelphia group. So it'll be interesting. I think there's a couple reasons why we might want to consider pushing this again. And I also hate to say that. I'd like to come up with a conclusion, but I'd like for council to have a little bit of time to review this stuff too, and get an idea of, are these other communities, did they track down a way to handle this that largely doesn't seem like it's just controlling the content, but it's done through a different process? Or are they all just hoping that they don't get called to the carpet on it, which is possible. But I think with a little bit of time reviewing this, some good advisement from the council, from our council, and then I think that gives everybody at this table a little bit more time to come here with some ideas. It's interesting to me because when I hear Commissioner Smock talk, I mean, some of the things you're saying are inherently part of this process already. And the RFP process and the selection and all those things seem to kind of go around that. So what I think we need to do at this table in order to move forward is understand that I think we're all saying the same things, but the challenge here is to make sure that it passes legal muster. That just because these are all good ideas and they sound like interesting ways to do it, if someone presses the issue, does it hold up under the light? And that's the part that I'll want a little bit of advice from.
And and again, I haven't had the opportunity to review this in depth, but looking at the face of the Memphis program, it says how we develop public art, and we have the public art versus private art distinction.
Yep.
And public art you certainly have, which is why we've kind of moved in the direction of allowing public art, but not beyond that. That's where you do have content regulations. So it may be that we find once we get into this that these are mere processes consistent with what Craig suggested of just how content regulation and providing some direction on what you want to see in the murals is done in other communities in the arena of public art, as opposed to allowing more than public art.
Yeah.
But and certainly if you have an opportunity, if any of you have feedback beyond tonight, as you look into things, if you pass it along to me before the meeting, then I can consider that and reflect it in a draft for the next meeting, to hopefully put this to bed.
I kind of enjoy watching you respond on the spot, though. It seems more like a criminal investigation that way. No, I agree. I think we just, I don't know how this became our Hadrian's Wall, but I do think that we're getting somewhere. We just now need to sort of hone in on what exactly we're doing with it. And what's nice is some of these processes that if we do find that they're working and they do what we need to do, this will be a good template for us to step into without having to recreate the wheel. Any other thoughts or questions here tonight?
I like the way it seems like this Memphis one. I've seen it for the first time tonight, but there is a process where the mural content actually sees the light of day for a considerable amount of time before it actually gets painted or placed on the wall.
Yep.
And that provides really, I think, a good safety net for community acceptance of something like that. I just think that would be. There's still the risk, of course, but I just feel like if we can have a process where there's a lot of public hearing on what's going to happen, it might intimidate somebody who's thinking that they're going to pull a fast one and put something up that's going to offend us.
But the risk is that someone would bypass this whole process and say that you can't stop them.
Well, I think the question is too, have we found this process for a private entity, right? So this is public as well, so.
The Memphis one is,
And you're-
Yeah.
You're saying you think Tucson has it for private?
Tucson definitely does. In fact, the EDC, I think that his job was, yeah, I feel terrible. I can't recall his exact job there, but he said to me that in recent years, the public one has been easier. I'm sorry, the private one has been easier than public. That they've had to sort of somewhat in-house police what potential citizens who have run for office and things, who are now in power positions, have wanted to put on there. So they've actually taken on more of a political role on the public buildings by virtue of who's elected than the private ones ever did, which I thought was an interesting, I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, they have two programs. Now, what I didn't understand entirely, and I don't know that we'll know the answer even here, but it's possible that because of funding through Tohono O'odham Nation, maybe, I don't, there's, because that's coming from grants, and those grants are positioned in such a way that I'm sure there's a ton of oversight in what gets submitted and how it gets submitted. And I think that because of that, that it probably is less likely to have someone try and just jam it in, because it's all, you can't do it unless you're being accepted by this private grant foundation. Maybe that's something we could look at too, I don't know. But yeah, that program specifically has both public and private locations and art. All right, any other thoughts?
I like section B of the proposal.
Administration review?
No, I'm talking about the ordinance that was presented to us, just section B. I think short and simple, and the only thing I question is whether we need the other sections even, if it's a public. So I mean, I guess in thinking of writing it for public use, I think there's probably a lot of language in here that could be taken out. And maybe the criteria is something that's not part of this ordinance, and it's something outside of, maybe it's something that's determined by each public body in terms of the process and committee and things like that. But so just in the interest of moving forward, I mean, I don't know that it has to be that complicated to say we've got a ordinance that allows for public bodies to install art on private or public buildings. So that's kind of my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, I think my only concern with this on the public side at all is just adding more for our administration and our village government to have to handle. But you know, I think that would they have to create additional processes on that, and they'll have to figure out who's going to be responsible for some of this stuff. Other thoughts or questions?
Should you let Leanne sit down?
I kind of like just having her there.
I stand well.
Yeah, if there's no other questions for Leanne, thank you very much.
I do agree with what Leanne said too about funding being a potential issue. I don't see our community willing to foot the bill for a lot of murals, right? So if private entities want to have murals and they're willing to fund it, I think that's a better plan financially.
Any other discussion this evening? So it looks like right now what we're looking at is we've got some members who consider some verbiage change, but otherwise that this ordinance may be suitable. We've got some other commissioners who would like some further time. Do we have any motions to consider?
I'm not as optimistic about a private private mural. And even though I think it'd be great to have more murals, I mean, I'm in favor of them. But I think moving forward with the public option is maybe a way to kind of test the waters and see if there's interest and in a direction where I think even if a private citizen wants one on their building, I think we could lay out a pretty simple process where the village would be involved in taking ownership of it, starting the process of asking for funds. That private owner can fund it, or at least partially or wholly fund it. So to me, I mean, if we're in a hurry, I mean, to me, that's one way to expedite this, is to say, well, we're going to allow it under a public umbrella. I'm not saying we have to prove anything tonight. I'm just saying I think that's the quickest way to do it and the safest way to do it.
My concern with the ordinance as written now, under this sort of revised thought process, is if we're going to try and use a private building with some sort of an agreement that places the wall in as a public sector, we still need to work out the details of how that financing makes it from private to public. And then, Pat, there has to be some oversight there, right?
I don't think it would necessarily be the ordinances. I don't think the ordinance would have to address financing. I think each public body would have to reconcile the financing decisions.
Okay.
But ultimately, if it was a private party paying for the installation of a mural and the money wasn't going through the public body, you'd have a hard time justifying the fact that it's the public body installing a mural. So my expectation would be to meet what is in section B of the ordinance, that public body can install a mural, that ultimately the check gets written from the public body, how
it gets
public
funded
body
is-
raises funds.
And Patrick, would the public body then own the art kind of in perpetuity? I mean, it would be forever owned by the public? Is that how that would work?
Or as
Well,
long as that agreement exists.
Yeah, it would be the public body would own the art, and yeah, I'm not sure it would be in terms of intellectual property purposes. I wouldn't necessarily go that far, but at the very least, the public body would own the medium on which art was installed. They'd have the ability to remove it at their discretion, maintain it, things of that nature.
So if business A came and said, I want a mural on my wall, I'm gonna lease you this wall, and we agree with what they're gonna put on there, and they pay for it funnel it through, and it works. And then business B comes up and says, I wanna do the same thing, but I want to say this, and we're like, no, there's no issue there.
The process shouldn't be intended as an artifice to create regulation where you can't have it. So, if the intent is to adopt this, to use the public body as a funnel to do what you can't do otherwise, I think that's a dangerous mentality or approach to take moving forward.
Okay.
I think, and I can't imagine any of our public bodies would be all too eager, and I can speak specifically to the village. The village, in my opinion, wouldn't be eager to serve in that funneling capacity. If there was a project presented that seemed to have a community benefit, that the village felt, by participating, by installing the mural, it would provide, all those economic benefits we seek, I think certainly the village would be interested in installing the art. But in terms of just serving as some clearinghouse for private murals, isn't something I know the village would be interested in, and it's not the message I would want to have going forward attached to this ordinance.
Okay.
That this is our workaround.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about that. These meetings aren't recorded. I think, the intention of what you're saying, though, I guess, there'd be a chance for somebody to say no, essentially, is what you'd come up with, and
I just feel like we're not really meeting the need. If the need is that
That's correct.
is that multiple private entities want to put murals in, we either need to decide that we're going to let it happen or we're not going to let it happen, right? I don't think we have a need where there's a lot of public art desire on our public buildings.
Right, so what I discovered in this writing was that it doesn't have to be a public building. right? That it could be a private building. So I guess what I was envisioning is a private business person comes to the village and says, I'd like to put a mural up. And we say, okay, and the village says, okay, well, we have a committee. There's one person from each public body that's on this committee that reviews the art. You can be on it too, as one of the members. And the process is that the village will own the art when this is all said and done, and the village will commission the art. You're welcome to donate to it, and you're welcome to sit on the panel, and it'll get decided based on these criteria, which are Morton oriented, and not just promoting your business, but promoting the community, whatever those criteria are. And so any private business owner can go through that process, and they'll be a part of the process, but they won't have ownership over the message or anything like that. And then maybe there'll be a process where there's artists submit designs, and there's a selection process. And like I said, maybe there's a body made up of one member from each of the public entities, one person from the library, one person from the village, maybe the Chamber of Commerce, EDC. I mean, that's kind of what I was envisioning. And then in the end, the village owns this art. That's kind of what I was, so it wouldn't stop any private business person from using that process and actually having some input into what the art would look like, being on the committee, but not have sole control over it. They'd have like maybe one vote. That's kind of what I was envisioning in it.
Maybe it could be funded with a fundraising effort.
Mm-hmm.
And, if the owner of the building happens to just give all the money that it takes.
That's what I'm saying. Exactly.
Or, there could be a GoFundMe page on it or something.
Mm-hmm. Right. And maybe there could be a right of refusal at the end if the owner of the building sees how this is going and sees the art. I don't know.
So
Maybe
I
they
would
could
like
say,
to
well, no, I don't want to do it after all.
I'd like to see that better defined, how that works.
We'll just like it coming out of the top of my head.
Right, yeah. Instead of just approving what we have in front of us, is what I mean.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but I think this is a good start.
Yeah.
All right, so.
I move that we table this to a future meeting. Table this ordinance.
Motion is made by Mr. Keach to table this discussion for additional review. Do we have a second?
I guess so. Oh.
A race. Ms. Oberst. All right, motion made and seconded. Go ahead and call when ready.
Net,
Yes.
Ritterbusch,
Yes.
Smock,
Yes?
Westlake,
Yes.
Deweese,
Yes.
Zobrist.
Yes.
Farrell,
Yes,
Keach.
Yes.
Approved.
thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I just make a suggestion?
Uh-oh.
In order so we don't table this again, if there's going to be material brought, it needs to be brought so that we can get it through the proper channels so that everybody has a chance to read it and you're not sitting here trying to digest it. I mean, we could be beating this thing down the road again.
Yeah, I agree. I think what we'll do is I'll submit some of the information that I had tracked through the earlier findings with Tucson and Philly. I'll send those directly to council, and he can review some of that to try to figure out how that's working. But I think even bigger, I mean, unless I'm wrong entirely, I think the idea here is that we're sort of honing in on this ordinance and now just trying to further define some of the processes that take place in it, which I think we can get to. I would say if anyone else has comments or comes across things, please forward them along as well.
Could I could see kicking this down the road 2 meetings by having the next one be a presentation by Justin or a small group of people or whoever that would, well, let's talk about these ordinances instead of being given an ordinance to approve. That's what we're talking about, is this ordinance that we're getting, instead of maybe broadening the discussion a little bit. I think these ordinances have been very helpful, especially this one has been helpful in framing a discussion, but should we talk about it more together, or should there be a subcommittee that talks about it?
I think what we have to decide here for this table is how involved in the process are we going to be? So, being presented with and making alterations or amendments to an ordinance so that we feel like it fits the process is what we do. I get a little nervous that as we move forward from anything beyond that we are trying to then also create the process that in this particular case, as I see it, and again, interrupt me when I'm wrong, but if we are allowing public bodies to make this determination, then in doing so, we're also submitting that the public bodies will create their own process by which they will oversee and provide their thing. Now, that might not be the case, but that's how I read it, is that now they'll go figure out how they integrate this, which I'll be honest was part of my concern. I was a little worried that we're taxing them.
That's why I go back to I like section B, and I don't know what else we need. That's kind of where I was at with it.
One of the challenges in trying to bring an ordinance to you is, respectfully, sometimes you may leave with more of a feeling of consensus than I leave with when I sit down to write things. A lot of differing opinions and positive feedback of different regards, but I'm not sure all those end up merging well into a proposed draft ordinance.
Right.
I mean, in my opinion, I think you have three issues, one of which has been a lingering one, which has come up again tonight, which is kind of that sentiment of, I know you're saying we can't regulate this if it's private art, but surely there's got to be a way we can regulate this. And if that issue lingers, and we want to explore processes to see if there's something we've missed throughout this process, we can do that. I think the second issue is whether you want to open this up as public art, and then the third is, if so, to what extent do you want to impose a process, impose requirements, or defer to public bodies? And if you want, I'm happy to provide whatever information, or certainly up to the commission to define the process it wants to go through beyond, the public hearing process if you want, further evaluation. I'm not sure once some of those issues are resolved or definitive direction is had, I think it all slots together pretty reasonably. If you all left here, for example, if the direction was we want it to be public art, but we want to define a process, we're going to regulate content. We'll have an RFP, and we'll have a theme, and we'll have a commission, and we'll have submittals, as Craig kind of rattled off the top of his head. I can write that, and I think give you something that would be in the vein of what you could redline and approve in one meeting. But if you feel you want more information before you make a decision on what direction you want to go, then it may be hard to get you a good draft that you can approve.
I guess the question is who's willing to give up on a solely private process and who's not. I think I'm kind of with Patrick in that I don't see an avenue that's constitutional, even though you've got a gauntlet of processes and screening and all this. I don't know that stops a person from saying I'm doing my own thing and your whole process is unconstitutional. That's what I worry about. So that's why I think just moving forward with a public option is at least a starting point. If later we discover there is a great method for private only decisions to be made, that this doesn't stop us from pursuing that also. Well, does Patrick need direction on what, do you have enough direction from us, Patrick?
Well,
on what
I
you
think
would write?
no, I think he doesn't.
That's what I think. He probably
Yeah.
needs that.
So here's why I made that motion, is that we had a public hearing and we have comment from the public that it wasn't quite, wasn't quite there in terms of what, you know, their potential private mural maker has in mind. And so I don't know, and if there's no emergency, why not talk a little bit more with maybe even that person that might be wanting to do a mural, or with Leanne a little bit, take a look at Justin's research, take a look at this Memphis, you know, and if it can't be done, I actually like the idea if we can find a way to do it with public art.
And
You know, but I want to make it so that we can actually do it, and it's not like, you know, somebody wants to do it and there's no process for them to do it, you know.
I think, Pat, if we come and we provide a little bit more research, I think the direction for you is that this is going to go, you know, we're going to move in a direction. I think everybody here is assuming that this is our worst case scenario, yes, is to just allow it only to be public and to work around the private issue. But I'm hearing from this table that the process, they would like to have some involvement over that process. So maybe for this meeting, if you would add in some of that, specifically the discussion points that Commissioner Smock made, I think are very similar to what I'm seeing both in the Memphis one and it would appear as well to the Tucson ones that we've reviewed, that there is an RFP process with some selection and things. And I mean, it sounds to me like this table wants to see that process integrated into this as well to some extent. Am I missing that? Am I speaking for someone that's not feeling that way? Because I keep hearing it come up.
That's what I said, which probably means it wasn't what Craig said.
You just
He
didn't
says take it away, the process. He says keep the one paragraph, so.
Keep on, you know, I think in terms of policies and then procedures, policies are short. They grant permission and then they point to guidelines, and then guidelines are the procedures, and they can be created outside of the ordinance system. I mean, maybe that's too simplistic, but
I'm okay with that if it actually happens.
well, interest would prompt it to happen, right? If someone came forward and said, "I want to do this," okay, well, I guess we better get some guidelines together, you know. So at least you'd have the ordinance in place, as simple as it might be, that if there's interest coming forward, then you might have to move forward and come up with some guidelines.
I'll chime in to say I'm looking for less process that we have to come up with. That's not
I
what
agree.
we should be doing.
I agree with that.
Yeah, and I also get a little bit nervous when if under this ordinance or a similar one, we are saying that the public bodies will make these final determinations and then we're providing them with everything that they have to do. It seems a little like we're overstepping, and I'd rather see what their review looks like and allow us. But again, I'm open to whatever. I am nervous about the amount of work that takes. Not just from their counselor, but from whoever at these public bodies, whoever is going to be in charge of it for each of them. I'm just a little nervous about that. I think they're all doing more with less, and adding additional duties to their limited resources.
But we're only recommending to the village board, so if the village board thinks this is unruly, I think let them take it from there.
Yeah. Okay, then, so let's provide at least a little clarity for Patrick here moving forward. So we're going to table this for next meeting. We will bring it back into consideration with what additional insight?
Why don't I give you two things? I'll give you a stripped down version that just permits it. I'll give you an alternative with some regulatory framework or some procedural framework, and then you have two options, both of which should be close to ready for final decision.
Hold the onion.
Why not? We could try it.
Okay. All right, so that motion has been made and approved, so it's we're tabling this. I think council has enough direction now to hopefully not spin in the mud too much, or at least too much more. So, all right. That ends the public hearing section of this evening. Roger, do you have anything tonight?
No, sir.
Nothing from the trustees? Do we have a motion to adjourn? Moved. Do we have a second?
Second.
There we go. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? The end.